Okay, I'm back again, and we're reading George and Marina, the Duke and Duchess of Kent, and the writer is Christopher Warwick. It's a very good short story, short book, short chapters. There's 16 of them, and we are on chapter 12, Dear Mr. President. And in this chapter, it's the start of the World War II. So George is working on his role and has to return to wearing a uniform. In this chapter, we hear news of Prince Michael. Prince Michael of Kent is born, and Marina and what she does to support the war. And she has to wear a uniform. And in the beginning, she's not too thrilled about it, but she ends up helping because she's such a chic and stylish. She ends up helping to redesign some of the uniforms. So it's a very good chapter. It's a short chapter. So I'll go ahead and get started. Chapter 12, Dear Mr. President. During the early months of the Second World War, George, the Duke of Kent, found himself in a naval uniform once more. This time, however, it was not the ceremonial kind, tinkling with stars, orders, and token medals, but the sober rig of an officer reporting for desk duty at the Admiralty. All too soon, however, he decided it was an awful waste of time, and for the second time in his life, he wanted out of Britain's senior service. What he wanted, he told his brother-in-law, Paul of Yugoslavia, was something that would be really useful to the country. Telling Paul that he had petitioned the prime minister, he went on, "We are used for anything and everything in peace, but when it comes to war, no one wants us." Although the king had not long promoted George to rear admiral, he agreed to his transfer to the Royal Air Force with the rank of Air Vice Marshal. To some extent, the Duke of Kent's duties at the RAF reflected the kind of work he had undertaken for the Home Office Factory Inspectorate. Though the focus had now shifted from overseeing safety regulations and working conditions to boosting workers' morale. In the performance of these duties, George dropped the rank conferred on him by the king in favor of that of group captain. The reason for this was to avoid him being placed, no matter how nominally, in a superior position to the senior officers under whom he would have to work. By this time, Marina had found herself in a uniform as Commandant of the Women's Royal Naval Service, otherwise known as the Wrens. Smart though the navy blue skirt and jacket, white shirt, and dark tie were, the Duchess was not enamored of having to wear it. Indeed, she would not have done had Churchill himself not made it clear that she was required to do so. That aside, Marina was, as Jennifer Ellis wrote, the most conscientious of commandants, and the post was anything but nominal. She traveled all over the country, visiting all the chief centers of the WRNS. She never sparing herself a tiring or difficult journey. She brought a human touch to every routine inspection. Walking down a line of girls, she would stop to talk to each one personally, not just a conventional sentence or two, but with genuine interest. What might be called the Marina effect did more for the image of recruitment and morale of the Wrens than any costly poster campaign would have achieved. Oh, yeah. Every time her photo appeared in the press in her uniform, Dame Vera Lawton Matthews, director of the WRNS, recalled, There was a rush to join up. Much as she may not have liked wearing it, the Duchess of Kent had a hand in the design of the uniform, which is to say that she, together with the Director and First Lord of the Admiralty, put their heads together over a change in the style of a hat to be worn by the Wrens. It's very important to recruiting, Marina said. No woman wants to wear a hat that makes her look unattractive, war or no war. From the time of her appointment right through to the eventual cessation of hostilities 5 years later, Marina's personal touch proved inspirational. Dame Vera said of her, wherever she went on her tours of inspection, she gave enormous pleasure. She insisted on seeing the girls' quarters and on finding out whether they were comfortable. She visited the galleys, which she insisted on calling kitchens, and talked to the cooks. Young people are always quick to recognize sincerity. The girls felt that the Duchess took a personal interest in them and that she really cared whether they were happy or not. It was in that spirit of personal involvement that the Duchess of Kent agreed to appear for yet more recruits. Her broadcast, which was seen on film as well as broadcasts on the wireless on 20 January 1941, brought, in the words of the director, an immediate response from all over the country. In part, Marina had said, since February 1940, when I became Commandant of the Women's Royal Navy Service, I've been able to visit a number of ports where units of the Wrens are employed. I had always heard what a wonderful spirit of friendship existed through the organizations as a result of my visits. I know this was no exaggeration, and I also know why. Wren officers are promoted from their ranks, and so they understand the conditions of life and work among the ratings with whom they have to deal with. During her broadcast, Marina highlighted the importance of roles across the entire spectrum of service life, with the cooks and the stewards and the clerks and the bookkeepers, the wireless telegraphists, the switchboard operators, shorthand typists, and so on. All were needed. It may mean a sacrifice to leave your home and possibly work that interests you, Marina included, but you will have the feeling that your new work is essential to our war effort. In this connection, I should like to say a word of congratulations to the many thousands of Wrens who are already serving their country. We are very proud of the wonderful way in which you have carried on your work during the air raids and at times of tension. We admire your courage, and we know that danger is met unflinchingly because of the future happiness of our families and homes. Depend on our victory. If you join the Wrens, you will know that you have done your share and are worthy of your country. The Royal Navy was not the Duchess of Kent's only wartime involvement. At the very she offered her services to the Ivor and Denham Cottage hospitals, which had opened a few years earlier. And there, along with several other local volunteers, she made dressings, splints, swabs, and helped generally. Later, she went to work at University College Hospital in central London as a nursing auxiliary. At the time, a Miss Bond was the nursing sister of the Ward 16. She recalled, the matron sent for me one day and told me that the Duchess of Kent was to work on my ward. She was to be known as Nurse K, and her identity was to be kept a close secret. The registrar and senior surgeon obviously knew what was afoot, but the news didn't leak out for the first few weeks. That it did leak out, though, sooner than anybody might have wished, was due to one vigilant patient, a dressmaker's assistant, who kept a close watch on the fashion columns. Having been told repeatedly that the royal look-alike was only Nurse Kay, the patient in question finally declared triumphantly, that voluntary assistant detachment is the Duchess of Kent. I've seen her pictures before dozens of times. Nobody is going to tell me it isn't her. During her anonymous period at the hospital, of which she became patron in 1942, Princess Marina came and went as much as she liked. As official commitments would permit, she took part in all routine activities in the ward: surgical dressings, bed making, washing patients, doing hair, tidying lockers, plumping up pillows, feeding and handing round meals on trays. She assisted in the pre-operational preparation of patients who were due for the theater, and the removal of tubes after the operation was also part of her job. Okay, I don't see Meghan Markle doing any of this. Just saying. As with other members of the royal family, news of the wartime engagements of both the Duke and Duchess of Kent was carefully censored. Visits to factories, air raid precaution depots, hospitals, rest centers, fire stations, and the like were never announced in advance, and press items that appeared afterwards only provided the briefest of details. According to James Wentworth Day, the Duke went down to the East End dozens of times while air raids were on, and was in one shelter holding no less than 7,000 people while the place shuddered to bomb blast. One time, a bomb blew up with a terrific explosion within yards of its car. Bricks, broken glass, and debris rained down. The Duke stopped his car, got out, perfectly unperturbed, walked across to a group of people, and said, "That was a near thing, wasn't it? I am very glad to see that none of you are hurt." One delicate diplomat mission that was entrusted to Prince George at the time called for all the charm, warmth, and diplomacy at his command. In June 1940, Winston Churchill selected him to fly to Portugal to call upon the Prime Minister, Dr. Antonio Salazar. Though ostensibly heading the British delegation attending the 800th anniversary celebration of Portuguese independence, the real purpose of the Duke's task was twofold. First, it was to reaffirm the historic friendship that had existed between Britain and Portugal since the 14th century. And two, it was to reassure the strictly neutral Salazar and that Britain's position in the war was not the lost cause. Well, let me read that again. Two, it was to reassure the strictly neutral Salazar that Britain's position in the war was not the lost cause German propaganda would have him believe. Returning to London on July the 2nd, the Duke, and by definition the British government, was secure in the knowledge that the sympathies of the Portuguese dictator were with Britain and her allies. The following year, from late July to early September, George, who had recently been promoted to the rank of Air Commodore and who was eager for further purposeful assignments, was scheduled to undertake a goodwill visit to Canada in order to inspect air training schools. At his suggestion, he also went on to visit his friends, the Roosevelts, in the United States. It would not only be an important diplomatic gesture, it was a personal thank you from the King's brother for American aid, but it would also provide him with a chance to see something of American factories engaged in the war effort. Moreover, George, who was still at heart dissatisfied with the work he was doing, He had hoped it might lead to a more substantial opportunity to utilize his ambassadorial abilities. Approved in London, the Duke's proposal was put forward to Lord Halifax, Britain's ambassador in Washington, D.C. From his office on the 24th of July in 1941, a letter was sent to the President informing him of the purpose of the Duke of Kent's tour of Canada, and adding that His Royal Highness would very much like to take the opportunity of paying a visit of courtesy to you. It was also been suggested that the Duke, while in the United States, might visit one of the dockyards engaged in repairing a British warship, and possibly a factory producing aircraft for Great Britain. On the 2nd of August, President Roosevelt approved the schedule for the Duke of Kent's 3-day visit, which was arranged to take place from 23 to 26 August. 3 weeks later, George flew into New York's LaGuardia Airport, and for the first 36 hours of his visit, relaxed with Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt at Hyde Park, their family home in New York State, before accompanying the president to Washington and the start of more formal activities. On Monday, 25 August, Prince George flew to Norfolk in Virginia to visit the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics Laboratory. The following day, it was on to Baltimore, where he inspected the Glenn Martin aircraft factory, addressed 10,000-strong workforce, and remained to lunch. Back in Washington early that evening, George toured the Capitol, the Supreme Court, the Washington Monument, and the Lincoln Memorial, before visiting the Mellon Art Gallery, attending a cocktail party given by the National Press Club, and meeting Dominion ministers at the British Embassy. After the Duke's visit, Eleanor Roosevelt said, "I think what impresses me most of all in meeting English people today is the great strain under which they have been, and their sense of obligation in fulfilling whatever they consider to be is their duty. In coming to Canada and the United States, they represent the British people, and they try in every way to express to us the appreciation they feel for the constant flow of aid from this country." In a cable to the Roosevelts, which he sent from Hamilton, Ontario, the day after he returned to Canada, the Duke of Kent reinforced those sentiments when he said, "On leaving your country, I would like to thank you, Mr. President and Mrs. Roosevelt, once again for your wonderful kindness and hospitality during my stay. I am deeply appreciative of the opportunities that were given to me to see something of what your country is doing to help Britain, and I am greatly impressed with what is being done and what can be done." From the Citadel on Camp Diamant in Quebec, the official residence of both the sovereign and the governor-general, Prince George reiterated his thanks in a more personal letter to both Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. Addressing himself to the president, the Duke, in his distinctive hand, he wrote, "I waited until my arrival here before writing to thank you once more for all your kindness. During my visit to the USA, I cannot thank you enough for having me stop with you and for giving me the opportunity of talking to you and hearing your views on so many subjects. The gratitude of the British people for what you have done for us is immeasurable, and their admiration is unbounded. But I feel I must add my own word of admiration for all you're doing. I was so glad to see something of your forces and also of the naval and air force plants. The Glen Martin factory is most impressive. I am only sorry my stay was so short and that I was unable to see more. I have had a very rushed trip since I left Washington and only arrived here yesterday to stay with the Athlons, his aunt and uncle, Princess Alice, Countess of Athlone, and the Earl of Athlone, who was the Governor General of Canada from 1940 to 1946. I leave for England sometime next week and shall take back to the King not only many messages from you, but also many heartening words of all I have seen in your country. Between their official duties, George and Marina tried to preserve some sense of normality in what, during the war years, passed for some home life. As parents, both the Duke and the Duchess of Kent were devoted to Eddie and Alexandra, scuttling home in time for the children's tea on days when they had public engagements to perform, playing games, telling bedtime stories, showing them off to friends, savoring the small incidents and childish saying treasured by most parents. At the age of 5 or 6, Eddie had already started to show signs of his father's love for cars and all things mechanical, and at Coppin's, father and son would spend hours tinkering about in the garage. To the young prince, the Duke was also the fount of all knowledge, and there is a story that when he was in the hospital having his tonsils out, Eddie asked his mother, "How many bricks are there in the hospital, Mommy?" Marina confessed she hadn't a clue when asked. Had the matron, of course. A little later, the boy profoundly proclaimed that his father had solved the mystery. Greatly impressed, but nevertheless curious, the matron took the Duke aside and asked him how he had found the answer. "I didn't," he replied, "but for heaven's sake, don't tell my son that I'm a liar." Like most children, Prince Edward and his sister were boisterous and at times clumsy. As happened at the end of one of Chip's canon visit to the family, afternoon tea ended in tragedy. He noted in his diary, as little Edward became bumptious and knocked over a table, spilling a kettle of hot water over his pink legs. The Duke lost his temper. The Duchess was in a flurry. Nannies rushed in. But little Alexandra, delightfully unconcerned, turned around and, as if to change the subject, said, "I love soldiers, don't you?" The Kent's third child, the second son, was born at Coppins at 7:35 p.m. on Saturday, the 4th of July, 1942. For once, the Home Secretary, who was traditionally present at a royal birth, or at least in the next room, was absent. Then the incumbent, Herbert Morrison, was too tied up with extra duties as the Minister of Home Secretary to waste valuable time playing lip service to a custom originally established in 1688. At that distant time, when the wars of religion were still fresh in people's minds, the unfounded rumor was spread that James II's wife, Mary of Modena, had been delivered of a stillborn child, and a Catholic changeling had subsequently been slipped into the royal bed in a warming pan. As a result, the king introduced the requirement for an independent witness to be present at future royal births. Anachronistic though it had long been since become. Oh no, maybe with Harry they need to introduce that again, because he really is pulling a number on the royal family. Anachronistic though it had long since become, and the tradition was not finally abolished until 1948, when Princess Elizabeth was expecting the birth of Prince Charles. The Home Secretary had no choice but to accept the Duke of Kent's word that the latest addition to the royal family was indeed legitimate. With the birth of their youngest child having come on a day of such national importance in the United States, George and Marina decided to ask Franklin Roosevelt to become one of the infant's godparents. 2 days later, in the way of diplomatic niceties, their invitation was formally extended to the president via John Wynot, then the American ambassador to the court of St. James. Cabling Washington, he said, "The Duke of Kent has just sent me the following note. My wife and I would be so delighted if you would be the godfather to our son. We should be especially pleased as he was born on Independence Day." And on July 11th, Roosevelt responded, "I am much thrilled and very proud to be the godfather to the youngster, and will send him my affectionate I send him my affectionate greetings. I tell the Duchess that I count on seeing him as soon as the going is good." This rather curious form of communication between friends continued just over a fortnight later on the 28th of July, when Ambassador Wynot sent a further telegram to the president marked "Triple Priority." It read, "The Duke of Kent has asked me to send you the following message. We are so pleased you are to be the godfather. Christening takes place on August the 4th at Windsor Castle. The king will stand proxy for you. On the day of the service itself, the president cabled the Duke, 'My affectionate regards to Michael George Charles Franklin. I am anxious to see him as soon as I can. Do send me his photograph. Tell the king I will hold him to strict accountability until I am able to take over the responsibility of godfather myself. My warm regards to you and the Duchess. Written, signed, Franklin D. Roosevelt." Until the end of the war, which was in 1942, still lay 3 years distant, family happiness for Marina, her sisters, and their 60-year-old mother was clouded by enforced separation. Willie and her Bavarian husband, Count Touring, were officially Britain's enemies. Princess Nicholas lived under German occupation in her suburban villa outside Athens, while Olga and Paul were under house arrest in Kenya for alleged treason. This is not the place for a lengthy discussion of Yugoslavian politics, but briefly, Prince Paul's fall came about in March 1941 when, by yielding to ever-increasing pressure from Germany and her allies, he was forced into signing a tripartite pact, which, in essence, guaranteed Yugoslavian freedom from attack as long as German troops and equipment were allowed to free passage through to Greece. Despite an overwhelming vote in favor of this move from within the Yugoslav cabinet itself, Prince Paul, a regent with too many neighbors and too few friends, as he was later described, was branded a traitor and a quisling. Exile followed, and in April 1941, Prince and Princess Paul, now regarded as political prisoners, were en route to Kenya. There, under British jurisdiction, they were to be held at a Moroccan-style house called Osirian, on the shores of Lake Naivasha, which had been the home of Jocelyn Hay, the Earl of Errol of Happy Valley fame, whose unsolved murder in 1941 caused a sensation. Accusation of treason and subsequent house arrest for Prince Paul was a harsh penalty for a man whose sympathies had always been fiercely pro-British, and who, as regent, had attempted to steer a course that was in line with the country he so profoundly admired. But for the Duchess of Kent, the defamatory speeches in the House of Commons and the attacks upon her sister and brother-in-law that were published in the British press was no less difficult to hear. Throughout the war, communications with her mother and sisters were very difficult, though not impossible. Even so, there were times when Marina felt acutely alone without the kind of intimate companionship she, Olga, and Elizabeth had once shared for more than 30 years. But for the moment at least, the Duchess had her husband, and in whom she found comfort and support. And that is the end of chapter 12. Some very interesting developments. I mean, Marina was quite something in her contributions to the war. So, but that's the end of that.